Good morning, everybody here at New York. It's great to have you here for the second day, and welcome to everybody online, whatever time of day it is for you in the world. We're pleased that you can join us here today as well. We have another fantastic and exciting day of stimulation in order to really challenge us as to how we can have a bigger impact into the environments in which we operate in around the world. In that context, we have 75 countries or representatives from 75 different countries participating. At least yesterday we did, assuming they're participating today, which is a great representation of all corners of the globe. So really excited about the fact that the messages that we have here are being taken all around the world. From a practicalities point of view, for those of you that are here in New York and have registered for the UN event tonight, please make sure you pick up your entry badge downstairs in reception here. You will not be allowed to get in without it, so please make sure you pick it up before you leave the venue today to go across to the UN. Today is all about us thinking how we take what we do here within our environments out into the world. Yesterday was about how we should take the world in to our environments and respond to that accordingly. So we've turned the tables a little bit, and we've got an exciting agenda to figure out how it is that we can sort of spread the word and the news of what we do in order to generate greater impact. And as I mentioned, we've got another exciting program pulled together for you today. That starts off with a panel session. So I will invite Jason J up to the stage. Jason, there you are. I can see you behind the light there. Jason is the Director of Sustainability Initiative at MIT Sloan. He is a great teacher in leadership, strategy, and innovation as it pertains to sustainable businesses. And he's also somebody that engages his students with hands-on projects in order to ensure that they're getting practical examples of the subject matter. And he's going to be leading our first panel today. So please welcome Jason to the stage.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having us. I'm going to invite our panelists to please join the stage, and we'll introduce ourselves here in a moment. So let's see, Rumina and Fernanda and Jill. So I am Jason J. I am a 5-foot-tall white man in a blue suit wearing a my beloved Global Goals pin, which I'm very excited for. Rumina, you wanna?
I'm Rumina. I have mostly gray hair now. Used to be black. I'm around 5 foot tall, wearing a black outfit, and I'm so happy to be here.
Okay, I'm Bom dia. That's good morning in Portuguese. I'm Fernanda. I have brown hair, like around my shoulders, brown eyes. I'm Latin, and I'm wearing a blue shirt, blue trouser, and a beautiful, colorful necklace.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jill Bogie, and I'm from the Gordon Institute of Business Science. I think I'm the grayest shoulder-length hair. I am wearing a blue blazer with these wonderful SDG and Prime badges. Yes, my accent is a bit of a mix. It's unique. I am of Scottish heritage, but I live in South Africa.
The theme of our session today is about systems change. And when we talk about business schools in the world, what we mean is that if we want business schools to get out there and change the world, it also means that we need to look at changing ourselves. And there is an inner dimension to systems change and an outer dimension of systems change. So if we want to go out and create an inclusive, just, equitable world, we need to re-examine our own practices, like self-describing for those who might be not sighted in the audience. And it means examining other facets of who we are and how we do business if we really want to be a force for sustainable development. This, in a sense, I hope, is a preview for tomorrow's full day session where we're going to engage on the projects that you are all involved in around systems change. As we had our prep call, we wanted to kind of have set up one sort of framework into the room. So if we could advance the slide, there's a tool that we found useful. My friend and mentor, Peter Senge, was involved in crafting this perspective, which is to think about 6 conditions of systems change. So when we talk about systems change, what we mean is big, scaled, rapid transition to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, but understanding that achieving that kind of change requires, as we have in this picture, structural change, which means changes in policies, in resource flows, and in practices. But sometimes in order to achieve that, we have to dig a little bit deeper. We have to go to a relational change level, which is the next level down in this kind of upside down pyramid, which is to think about relationships and governance and the power dynamics, which can be somewhat more challenging to confront. And beneath that, our power dynamics and relationships arise out of our mental models, our ideologies, our paradigms for how we see the world. And so systems change sometimes requires us to dig into that level as well. And so what a lot of the conversations about sustainability are focused on policies and practices and resource flows. So we're going to sort of put that aside for the moment and focus in this conversation on the hard stuff. We want this to be a courageous conversation and to help set up some of the courageous conversations that are happening later in the day as well, and dig into the topic of power dynamics and mental models that we have to shift in the wider world. And in order to do that, we have to shift in ourselves. So what we wanted, we're going to have kind of based on our experience, we're going to have a kind of lively debate dialogue here about these topics. But I wanted to first start with this topic of power dynamics. And what does it mean for people in a business school to go and tackle power dynamics internally and externally? Rumina, do you want to get us started on that?
Definitely. So I think we talked a lot about the differences, right, between, for example, resourcing around the world. Some business schools have tons of resources available to them, and some don't. So how do we deal with collaborating when there's an inequality in the resources or reach or reputation? So we had a really quite an engaging dialogue. How do we do this? Because for some, when you talk about global south, global north, that just doesn't seem to address the inequalities even within the same kind of continent. So we had a really, I think one of the things that we talked about is how do we collaborate and bring in the resources and the knowledge and the skills so that we are able to sort of participate in an inclusive way that brings people to the table rather than separates us out.
And even the term you just used, global south, global north, when somebody came up, it's like, wait, that's a mental model that we need to address. Jill, do you want to share some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, because thanks, Jason. I raised it in our earlier conversation because it is part of an academic as well as a societal way of understanding developing and developed countries. And even that, for me, working as I have for 40 years in South Africa, as a developing country with its great inequality, as well as great economic opportunities, it is nonetheless a very binary way of trying to understand what is happening in our country. And it, I don't think is helpful when you say, well, we're in the same category as the Indian subcontinent, as South America, as what other countries are south when they're not even south of the equator? So what does south mean? Because these are all very different parts of the world. Some of them, Africa is an entire 54 countries. It's not a region, and we keep calling it a region as if it's a continent of 54 countries. And so what does that mean in this binary world of north and south? So I don't think that's a constructive mental model, and I don't think that's the way the world really operates, because people operate, for me, at the relational level. It's about how do we engage together, which is why it's so wonderful we have an in-person meeting, because we know each other well, but the personal connection is what makes things happen. It's the basis for me of action, because action is not just an individual endeavor. And so I think that is sort of segued from a specific example to really this framework of systems which focuses on these different levels. And for me, the relational, whether it's the power dynamics or whether it's the collaboration and the connections, the collective action, that is no surprise. It sits in the middle of this model.
Yes, yes. And if we want to achieve any kind of larger change, there's no way that any one of our schools can do it alone. So we have to be able to go and engage in collaborations, and we have to confront these historical dynamics between different countries that we can't just think of in these monolithic ways, but we look at the distinctive histories of our respective schools and communities. What are some of the other mental models that we have to confront if we want to make the bigger changes out there and in our own institutions?
Oh.
What do you think,
It's a
Fernanda?
big one. Yeah, for me, I was hearing yesterday a lot of practices that business schools are doing to address sustainability. But for me, we have to have the courage to talk about what's really causing the problem. So I believe that we should talk about the growth, for instance, and other models of organizing, because I have the sensation that we are still trying to improve a model that is not working. So capitalism is a way of organizing. It works for some things, but there are other ways of organizing that always works, and we should dig for it and explore what exists in the world. So for me, it's kind of challenge our mental model that this system is the only way that works, and we should go for other traditions and other regions of the planet that are doing interesting things, like indigenous people. Yesterday there was this amazing panel. It was a workshop, right? On indigenous people, and I believe that indigenous people should be this main panel, so we can learn from different experiences and challenge ourselves in our mental models. So
I was part of that workshop yesterday.
Yeah,
and
it was amazing.
It was fantastic. So the group from Australia that came to share their experiences was really inspiring. And one of the things that struck me was that is exactly what we're talking about here, which is the outer and inner dimensions of systems change, right? Is that part of the work is to go out and engage with indigenous communities to right the historical wrongs that have occurred through colonialism, and to empower social entrepreneurs and businesses in indigenous communities, and in doing so to transform ourselves, to ask the questions, to be open to learning, to notice the ways of the wisdom that exists in those communities about what we would call a strong sustainability view rather than a weak sustainability view, to understand that there's, as they say in some of the Canadian communities, there's one bowl, one spoon, right? There's one planet that we're drawing from, and we have to think about being moderate with our one spoon with which we take from that. And so you can't do that work without some kind of inner transformation.
That's right. If I could build on that. So I think when you talk about, looking at what business schools do, so I call it the C's of change, right? My C's are courage to admit that we're not designed to change the world. So courage to admit that perhaps some of the rhetoric that we engage in.
We meaning business schools.
In business schools,
Yes,
in business schools think that we can go out and change, but perhaps we have to understand that we're not designed yet, and maybe we need to change that. So courage to admit that, we talk about collaboration, but we really are based on competition. We rank each other and rate each other, and work on our reputations, and we have IPs and trademarks and all that. So we say, yeah, we want to collaborate, but then we don't. With courage that to admit that a lot of our curriculum is around colonialism, and how do we decolonize the curriculum so that our students are able to authentically go out there and impact and influence change. Courage to admit that that we're part of the system that really contributes to the carbon economy that's out there, and we teach, right? We really do that, and how do we handle that? So for me, I kind of look at my curriculum around those kinds of words that we don't normally teach. Compassion. Do we teach students how to be compassionate in the decisions they make, in the way they do business, in the products they engage in? So I try really hard to encourage my students to say, you're supposed to wear the corporate hat and take these corporate values and become this corporate tycoon. But really look at this with compassion, and how do we change things. So I think, and I love the idea of going into indigenous communities and learning and applying some of the philosophies that we can bring back. Sorry, I went on.
No, that's great. That's great. So how do we do that? How do we build that kind of compassion? What practices do we have, or how do we put that into action? I was really inspired by what you're doing in Brazil. Do you want to? Would you mind sharing about that?
Yeah, sure. We developed in our school a course called Sustainable Leadership, the Rainforest Perspective. So we take students from all over the world in the MBAs, and we put them in a boat for a week, and we go to Amazon River that is called Tapajós. And there we visit several communities, not only indigenous ones. We have different type of communities living in the Amazon. And during these days, we talk to these people and get their perspective on what is to be a leader. So during this week, these MBA students, they don't hear a single voice of a business leader. They just hear from communities and what's their perspective of what is to be a leader in the Amazon, having to deal with climate change, having to deal with biodiversity, and being the safeguards of this territory. And we have women that are leaders at their territory, and what we learn from that. And it's an amazing experience because by doing that, we challenge these students of what they learn in their business schools. What is a leader? What is to be a leader? So we challenge this concept. And the final assignment they have to do, I ask them to write in their own words if they could create a new leadership concept, what it should be. And it's amazing how they learn from the communities by hearing the communities and what they learn from them. And they learn how to be courageous and how to be brave and how to really listen to those peoples in a different way. So yeah, I love the experience, and I invite you all. I think you should go to.
Maybe that's our next MBS meeting in the Amazon.
Because it's very, it gives you a different perspective. So.
Thank you. Do you have wisdom for us about how to do this kind of work in your context?
Thank you, Jason. I'd love to add and reflect on the fact that you ended, Fernanda, on talking about different perspectives, because I think that's what the beauty is of adopting a systems thinking approach. I've used the Peter Senge work as a business executive and still use it in my academic work, but as well as various other models of systems thinking, which range from focusing on the individual, focusing on communities, focusing on different experiences, different parts of the world. But I find it a really important part of what I teach. And I feel strongly because it was something that I brought from my own business experience. And so I think the systems thinking, in whatever way you look at it, whether it's systems dynamics, whether it is the importance of, let's call it complicated technological systems or areas of problem solving, I think all of those are valuable, but what we have nowadays is a need to move into the space, which is what organizations are all about, which are people. It's people. They're complex systems, not complex adaptive systems. Some of them are, but that is borrowed from the natural sciences, and we are part of the natural environment. So complex adaptive systems are important for us to understand. It's important for us to understand socio-technical systems. But the piece that we don't seem to teach is actually bringing the human beings, the people, back into the organization and understanding what we actually already know, which is our relationships with other people, how to manage those, the difficulties, the obstacles, what we can learn from each other, how we can do work together and happily compete at the same time, but collaborate. We do these things every day. And that's actually complex social systems. And that, to me, is really fascinating. There's a great deal of academic work in it, and there's some very talented business executives who are knowledgeable in this area, and we don't seem to really pay enough attention to that in our curriculum because it's strategy and it's leadership. And it's like, so where is the relationship piece? Because that, for me, is that's complex systems. It's all about relationships, and I'm not a scientist. And I think that that's what is so beautiful about having this panel with these different perspectives, because there's no right or wrong. There's what is useful for what it is we want to achieve, and how do we work together to do that. And I do have some examples, but I know that we're going to move on in the conversation.
Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, and so it's interesting what you said is that there's no right or wrong, but there's what's useful for what we want to achieve. But if what we want to achieve is to create a sustainable world, and to create a society that is potentially a steady state or even a degrowth society, we've got some really, really big challenges to tackle. And so and I appreciate your kind of inventory of different systems thinking approaches to go and look at those kinds of questions, right? From system dynamics to complex adaptive systems, social technical systems. There's a litany of very wonky academic concepts. And I think what we should really spend our time here is, what does it look like in action? What does it look like to use these kinds of perspectives and tools to go and engage and use business schools, the platform that we have, as a force for change in the world? So what are we seeing? What are we each seeing that's most inspiring, that's most powerful, that's feels like leaning forward into the next phase of our work?
For me, it's the students. The students are driving, and we heard from so many people here yesterday, and Andy was talking about it. The students are driving a lot of the change, right? And they're demanding that we do better in terms of what we give them in terms of knowledge, the skills, the resources. So students are really pushing it. The internal pressures are coming. Business is way ahead. So I'm the board chair for the Global Compact Network Canada, and businesses often look at academics for some suggestions and answers. But when you look at what they're doing, they're moved so far ahead, but they're just focusing on sort of a slice. They talk about the environment, they talk about climate, they talk about net zero, they talk about emissions. But so people disappear from that, right? Like you're not paying enough attention to, okay, so what is happening with society? But students do. So when students talk about sustainability, they tend to talk about consumption. They tend to talk about the challenges to climate, but they also talk about poverty and hunger and going into experiences. So I really learn a lot from engaging with people who are coming in so I'm at Lang Business School, and so we try really hard to sort of engage with the community around us. We do a whole bunch of projects around circular economy. But boy, I tell you, these students are relentless. They come in and they ask you tough questions and then just push the envelope. So I find my inspiration really, what is it that they're facing? Where are they coming from? And then try and work my way through that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I was a business student at the business school that I actually work today. And for me, I think
Which we should say, I realized that I forgot to say the titles and institutions that everybody's from. So you were talking about FGV.
Yes, Fundação Getulio Vargas. So Yeah, for me, I think that we should. Somebody said yesterday that don't like to use business school. Me neither. I like to think on management or organizing, quoting Martin Parker. But I think that we should try to amplify the possibilities for our students in their paths. So presenting other ways of organizing, not only the corporations. So how can we take them to experience other types of organizations? NGOs are one of them, but there are cooperatives and social movements and other types of organizations. And that's a way for me, for business schools to be out there, to try to learn other types of organizations that could maybe better address climate issues, social issues. Big corporations, they are hard to change. They are trying, but still in a very weak sustainability approach. Because I don't know if it's possible for a big corporation to have a strong sustainability approach. I don't think so. And that's okay. We can have those types of organization, but we have others. So how do we teach our students and ourselves that we can organize differently? So, yeah.
I would love to also add more to the student piece, but because I'm so enthralled in terms of how much I'm learning from something that I already know about, which is the importance of our students and how we can leverage that. But I'm going to take a slightly different tack, because systems thinking is about alternative perspectives. And really, as a business person, how have I moved into academia, and what do I teach? I teach strategy. And what are some of the frameworks that I find useful from a teaching perspective? First of all, no surprise, I use case studies, and I've learned to focus on a case study that is sort of universal and the students seem to love, and I can use it in multiple different ways, which is not as a role model organization, but just because it's got such a rich history of grappling with sustainability issues on many different fronts, and that's the Nike organization. And the students just love it because they think, you know, we talk about the shoes and the glue in the shoe and the environmental issues and the labor issues, and it's a very rich case study. But I use it with some frameworks that I find are useful for the boardroom. The one that I see that also I5, it's in the I5 playbook, is the Dave Snowden Cynefin framework. And I particularly like that. He's Welsh. I've met him. He's a very, very smart man. But Cynefin means habitat or place or home. And that's in his Welsh language, that's how he built his model of systems thinking. But I find a framework that you can use because it recognizes the place for problem solving, for simple systems. How do we fix this? And it recognizes the importance of design thinking, the sophistication of the technologies that we're developing, and the important role that that is going to play in the way forward and in dealing with issues. And so many of our students are going to be working in those areas. But what it also recognizes is that all of those type of systems fit within the complexity of our social systems. And that is really where we need to focus our attention. And grand challenges are not things to be solved. They're not problems to be solved. They are issues to be addressed. They are challenges to be tackled. And so that is the language of complexity. And I teach complexity on the basis that we all live within the complex system on a daily basis, and we all know how to navigate our families, our communities, our colleagues at work, our colleagues outside of work, and yet we come to the office, we come to do business, and all of a sudden it's binary decisions based on, rational thinking. And of course, the world doesn't work that way. So how do we bring that conversation into the classroom? And I basically teach on the basis of a discussion from my students' experiences. So I've got the frameworks behind it. I use an amazing framework by strategy professors. and my colleagues probably laugh because as a business person, it probably is a little bit obscure, but I love it. It's Ferraro, Etienne, and Gaiman. Robust action. My students love robust action, and I want action because complexity is the space of action. And so I use all of those and mix my business knowledge, but it's the systems framework that pulls it all together and says we are missing parts of the systemic organizing that is the space that we operate in as a business school, and our clients and our students operate in as business people.
We've talked a bit here about this, about students and the educational part of this. I just want to also say that that's not the only sphere in which we engage, right? We can directly engage in the world as researchers from the platform of business schools, and that can be quite powerful. Yeah. My colleague Bethany Patton is here, who leads our Climate Pathways project, where we have a system dynamics model of the climate, and it's an interactive simulation tool. En-ROADS, some of you have used it in your teaching, and we've found that sitting at MIT Sloan, we have the ability to go and engage with political leaders, with elected officials, with CEOs and C-suites of companies, with investors, with high net worth family offices to institutional investors, and shape the mental models of how people address the climate and identify that planting trees isn't as high leverage for carbon reduction as putting a price on carbon, which is kind of steering the ship in a more significant way. And that has been a really important use of our power, use of our privilege, use of our access and our network and our resources. And our students participate in that as well. They're also sort of cheering us on as we're going out and engaging with these audiences directly. So just to say that bringing business schools out into the world is bringing our students there, but also much expanding our definition of who we might categorize to be a student.
Yeah, perfect.
We are reaching the end of our time here, and what we've hoped to do is just kind of open the space for the day. Really appreciate each of you sharing your wisdom and perspective, and I'd love to see all of you, those of you who are joining us tomorrow on the systems workshop, to really dig into the examples and the projects and the places where we're going out and bringing business schools out into the world. It's a workshop to develop that. Also a quick plug for immediately after this, those of us who are in the NBS Centers community, we have a workshop just across the hall, which I believe our MC is going to steward us to. But again, please join me in thanking our panelists, Rumina, Fernanda, and Jill.